Hey guys, what's up? So this video, I'm doing a comparison between Django and Node.js. And the video I did before, I actually did it probably earlier last or this year. Actually, I don't remember when I did it, but I know the video was absolute shit. But this video, I'll try to touch on a little bit more of what I choose between Django and Node.js. So number one, I think it needs a little bit more of a context surrounding like who am I, and what information do I actually know about this topic. So number one, I'm a programmer. I've been developing for about 7 years now, professionally for close to 5 or over 4, headed towards 5. I've been using Django for about 7 years, and then I've been using Node.js probably for 2. In addition, I'm a .NET C# programmer, so I deal a lot with ASP.NET Web Forms and also MVC.NET. And basically, I build websites. I'm a web programmer, so I'm not a games programmer or anything like that. I'm not some guy who doesn't know anything about web, but I'm also not a genius when it comes to anything like building frameworks from scratch or anything like that. However, I do have a Node.js framework that I built, and it's called Bayside.js, which I ended up making it because I felt like really I wanted a more Django style templating engine, more all-inclusive web application that was built for single page apps. Essentially, that was my goal, but I haven't really done anything with it. I created this a few months ago, but there's some examples that I have of actual websites that were set up on that framework. And once again, that's a Node.js framework. So Node.js, I think we need to properly understand the term. It's not a programming language. It's not even a framework like something like Django. It's basically a technology set that uses JavaScript that you can write websites and server-side technology using the JavaScript language, but it's not JavaScript. It's actually written in C and C++. I have videos that talk about what Node.js really is. But let's talk about a full framework. So let's look at like Express.js or a full stack framework like Sales.js. So Sales.js is much more full stack. Very comparable probably to something like Django. And then Python Flask would be very comparable to something like, I would say like my Bayside.js framework or Express.js, something like that. So the problem is though, is that I built websites on both. And when I was creating hipstercode.com, this is a framework but a website that is using the Django Python framework. So it's all written in Python Django. It uses some of the latest JavaScript stuff like React, and I'm using Babel to compile my JavaScript and things like that. In some of the places it's overkill, but the reason why I created this site was actually as a learning opportunity because I was going to be working with React and I needed to get more involved in React. And when I wrote this, I actually was using like older React, using ES5, which is the older standard of JavaScript, and the newest standard just got finalized last December. None of the browsers support it yet, but they call it ES6. So now I'm in the process of upgrading all that code that I wrote using React and Flux and ES5, and I'm actually making it React and Redux using ES6. And it's the crazy world of JavaScript. But the reason why I mentioned that and why I actually think Django is a better opportunity for a lot of reasons, a lot of companies that actually need working products, is because of the craziness that I've talked about a lot in the JavaScript community where one minute you're using Gulp and Browserify as like bundling modules and things like that, and next minute you're using Webpack 1, and then Webpack 1's time in the sun lasted 4 or 5 months, and now everybody's transitioning over to the Webpack 2, and eventually it's going to be something else. But there's always some new toy or new feature that we're talking about in JavaScript. Now everybody's saying React is too complicated, so let's use Vue.js, where Vue.js is hardly anything more than what Knockout was several years ago. So none of this stuff makes any sense. Like if it's going to help you, I think use it, but if it doesn't, then scrap it. So if you're going to build a website, and here's a website like this where I have the ability to be able to sign up to the website, so I need to be able to authentication. That means user permissions, things like that. I wanted them to be able to register through social networking sites. A lot of people like the convenience there, so I'm dealing with APIs. So I'm communicating back and forth with the Google API, with Facebook, with Twitter. I needed to have HTTPS enabled, so I needed to have a lot of tutorials and things like that on how to set up my Nginx server. This is using Apache 2 as well as Nginx for static content. Django works flawlessly under those conditions, I think. Another issue is, or another thing that I was going to talk about is, if I go to actually write some of these blogs and things like that, the simple fact that it's a CRUD application, so I'm simply displaying data from a database. So, okay, do I need to use MongoDB, which most Node.js frameworks are out there trying to get you to use Mongo? Mongo isn't anymore, it's not faster and it's not more reliable than either, I would say, Postgres or MySQL or SQL Server or any, most of these other major database engines. So with this site, I said, you know what, it's so much easier. Django is built around a relational database model, which is what we've been using since the 1970s. Django is built for that. Its entire authentication works out of the box. If I was going to use Bayside.js, I'm having to write all that shit from scratch, or Express.js. I could use a full stack framework like Sails, but once again, I'm not a big fan of either Sails or Meteor when it comes to full stack frameworks. If you compare it to Django, I think Django's better. In fact, I would even say probably MVC.net. It gets a step ahead of both of those as well. Because if I was going to build a site like that, I could use MVC.net or ASP.net, and I could host it in Microsoft's cloud or in AWS. But the thing is like, for a simple site like Hipster Code, I could have written all this stuff in Express, but the database issue is something that typically bites me. I'm a more relational database type of guy. MongoDB is not going to do away with relational databases. At one point, we thought this whole NoSQL model was going to, be this glory road down to riches and fame and things like that. And it turns out that's actually not the case. It's going to have its place, and it's not bad. It's just that, like, if it doesn't help you, why do you need it? So in this particular case, Django works with relational databases. Postgres is perfectly free, and it works very, very well. So here's my Postgres. I can run it locally. I have, Linux server that's obviously running this website. You guys didn't really know that, but obviously, I'm telling you now. It's Linux Ubuntu 14.04, which is running this website. I have another site that uses Express.js, and it was with React, and I'm using isomorphic JavaScript, so it's actually, the server is compiling the JavaScript on request, so when the browser sends down the data, it's already rendered, so there's no client-side rendering. And what's funny about that is that we said, with Node.js, you can write JavaScript on the front end and the back end, so that way you can share the same language. Then all of a sudden we say, and in addition to all that, because we want, first they said, hey, use JavaScript and let's push some of this functionality that's typically handled by the server, like page changes and a lot of validation, things like that. Obviously, you want to validate front and back end, but it's routing and things like that. We were like, you know what? It's so much better to have JavaScript do that, because then JavaScript is being executed in the client's browser, and it's not tying up server resources and things like that. So that was like this big argument for pushing a lot of these client-side frameworks that did a lot more server-side stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, that's bad experience, and we think it's too slow, and that the server now needs to render all that shit that we said we wanted to get rendered on the client's machine, but now we want to do it back on the server. So since we're doing it back on the server, let's use all these latest, greatest tools like React and Redux and all that stuff, and then have to do all this execution on the server to send down some rendered content, which still needs to be most likely interfacing to your website through an API to get data, to post data, all this other stuff. Once again, if it doesn't help you, don't do it. And for me, there's no benefit in all that stuff. I have major headaches trying to get all that shit set up when Django is perfectly fine. This Django stuff is simple. This is it, guys. This is the home page right here. I got tutorials that are sent down. That's how the tutorials are being displayed. I have an index.html. I don't need to have React and Redux running this front page. There's no reason for it. The data is pulled from the database. It gets displayed. You click on something, then you can take the quiz. You have to register, I believe, so it'll tell you to log in. And then, I should have had it taken back. But anyway, you go to the quiz. You can actually take the quiz, which then uses, the quiz is actually a little bit more, I think, involved, so that's why I went ahead and I wrote that in JavaScript and using React, and now I'm actually going to be using React Redux. But if you have to do a lot of what websites have to do, here I'm actually interfacing to a credit card provider, so I have to deal with credit card data that's being passed back and forth. Unfortunately, nobody ever pays for anything, so that's fine. They don't even click on the ads, but um, the opportunity is there for anybody that might that might one day click an ad or something like that. But none of that stuff needs to be rendered, and that's another issue. Like if I was going to have React render this entire page, now I have to load these scripts and things like that, where otherwise I could just paste them right into the template. This doesn't need React and Redux. It really doesn't. Now, one thing, it's not all pros for Django. Django is slower than Node.js, and it's noticeably slower. So the problem is, though, is that so many newbie programmers, when they're trying to pick out their next stack, including some hipsters that work for companies and end up making business decisions that cost millions of dollars, they focus so much on, oh, it's not, this is like a slight bit faster. I can do 50,000 requests in 0.25 milliseconds faster than Django or some shit. And obviously any speed boost you can get is great, but Django, Node.js is going to be faster. So if you really want to have that fast argument and talk about benchmarks and stuff like that, yes, Node.js is going to win. On the flip side to that, though, I would say that rarely does anybody ever experience the situation where they have to scale to such a massive level. And now with hardware and software, you can kind of shard this stuff out over server farms, and you should be okay. I mean, for Django, somehow it manages to run Instagram, Pinterest, and not Pinterest anymore, but still using a Python stack. But Instagram and a few other major websites are still running Django. So, they can scale it to billions of page views and things a month. But I don't know. So I guess the performance gains that I've seen from Node.js always end up biting me, because then I have to spend more time actually writing stuff that just works better with Django. Django also has much better documentation. It's not so bleeding edge that they break shit all the time. Node.js and all the JavaScript frameworks, they are constantly stepping on each other's toes, and they're constantly breaking each other. It is a nightmare of a headache to deal with some sort of npm install that downloads half the internet, because everybody's linking out to all these different projects, and then when you accidentally upgrade that bitch, all of a sudden you got all these problems. It's a nightmare. But Django has always had like the more, what I would say, traditional old school approach to programming that I saw a lot in the Perl community, where it's like, we're going to release a new version of Perl, or we're going to release a new version of Django, and we're not going to step all over everything that everybody's done in the past. This shit is going to work with stuff in the past. And sometimes it's inevitable that you're going to have changes that are very, very breaking, like when Python 2 went to Python 3. But some of that stuff with Python 3 could have been thought up better to say, do we really need to change some of this, basic syntax to break everything in the past? So I think, backwards compatibility, it seems like, is something that has just gone out the window with today's hipster startup, day and age. I think we need to get back to that, because honestly, I talked about WebAssembly, and WebAssembly is going to end up replacing JavaScript because of a need that needs to be filled. And right now, there's a need we need some clarity. We need some consolidation of the JavaScript community, because it's an absolute mess right now. Everybody out there who has a GitHub account is now trying to make a name for themselves, developing some sort of framework, including my ass, who built Bayside.js for no particular reason. I did it as a learning curve, but I don't tell anybody to go out there and use it. I'm not pushing it. I'm not even saying it does anything better than anybody else. I simply use it for my own side projects, because it's a relatively basic framework, and I know how it works, and the templating engine that I built into it is very similar to Django's templating engine. But yeah, we have this problem that needs to be fixed, and the fix is going to come through some sort of consolidation. So what I'm seeing now is Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Mozilla coming together to work on the web assembly standards. And granted, it's probably not going to replace JavaScript anytime soon, or maybe ever, but there needs to be, I think, more thought when it comes to this cutting edge stuff, and trying to make sure that we're not breaking everything every time we upgrade. Look at Angular 2 compared to Angular 1. The Angular 2, the tutorial I was doing a couple months ago, was absolutely atrocious. I mean, I had like 18 plugin files for a simple Hello World application. The client had to download like 1.85 megabyte of data. I mean, why are we doing that? For something where Django could have easily done that, Even if we just stuck with the basic Express.js with like a Pug template engine, you don't need all this crazy shit. And for that reason, I don't need Node.js. If I was going to build a chat application, I would use Node.js probably. Maybe if I was going to do any sort of process intensive stuff, so maybe if like someone fills out information and I start reaching across the web to make all these requests and things like that, then I might end up using Node.js for something like that. But if I need a CRUD application with user profiles, authentication, authorization, and just basically display and non-display, there's no reason why you can't use Django. And really, I would choose Django over Rails at this point, even though there's still more Rails opportunities. But Rails, it seems like, is dying because Ruby has definitely lost out in the language war with Python. And Ruby on Rails is like the only thing Ruby does really well, in my opinion. And it just seems like Python, there's opportunities there, despite besides the web framework end. So if you're not going to be a web developer, you can still find opportunities in Python, even though a lot of it's data sciences and things. There is still that opportunity where I don't know that exists as much on the Ruby side. So somebody asked me if Django was dying, and it's absolutely not. I think there's like 2,000 open Django jobs right now in the United States. Just according to Indeed.com, unfilled Django positions. I've seen a few shops. Like, granted, Node.js is still a very popular option, but I think people are starting to realize that Node.js isn't some sort of end-all, be-all solution. I mean, look at Walmart.com, which is written in Node.js, and it's one of the biggest piece of shit websites I've ever seen in my life. And I know it was hard work, and developers are probably completely inundated with the amount of effort that goes into some billion-dollar company like Walmart. But that site is terrible; it barely works, and I think some of the stuff that I've noticed is because of all the JavaScript problems. So leave it to JavaScript to actually complicate something like an input box, where all of a sudden you start typing an input and you have all these cascading errors because of all this crazy shit that you got going on the client. And it's just but when it works, it does work well. Like people point out, Netflix is written in Node, and Netflix is very, very good. I think those developers are pretty good, but Netflix's business model is not nearly as complicated as like a financial industry or an insurance industry, or even something like e-commerce like Walmart. It's just not the same level of complexity. They're displaying and streaming movies compared to something that literally is dealing with taxes and shipping and there's like, I think that they're obviously that Netflix is doing some of that stuff too, because they still ship DVDs, I believe. I haven't used that in 5 or 6 years, I don't think. But anyway, I don't want to downplay their complexity, but I have a feeling, my opinion, just uneducated opinion on it, is that Walmart has a much more complicated business model than Netflix. So maybe Netflix made the right decision using Node, but I feel like two of the sites that I hate the most, just with whole user interface layout and everything, is Walmart.com and LinkedIn, and both of them are written in Node, and both of them I think are shining examples of overarching complexity that sometimes JavaScript brings into the equation. Where if you do a little bit of both, I'm of the opinion that you don't need a single page application. You could have a traditional MVC app that has certain endpoints that are then displaying single page apps within that endpoint. You don't need your entire effing site to be a single page app. Why not have like a hybrid of both? I mean, to me, that's the way that it makes sense. I mean, I can have one endpoint, /quiz, that then behaves as a single page app for all this quiz based stuff. But then I don't have to deal with, all the analytics requirements and the back paging and all this stuff that, people try to, downplay and say it's not complex. But when you start getting hundreds of thousands of lines of code and JavaScript being injected all over the place, and all of a sudden, because of some tiny JavaScript error, all of a sudden your analytics are broken, your back paging functionality is broken, your links to your third-party ads that nobody ever clicks on are broken. All that shit, if you don't need it, don't use it. That's all I'm saying. And for God's sake, stop using ad blocker, because everybody uses ad blocker these days. All right, thanks, man. Take care, guys. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. If you are, thank you. I'm about to approach 40,000 subscribers. I think that's great. Very thankful for that, and still surprised by it. But you guys are great. Thank you. Bye. Hey guys, so a lot of you ask me, how do I get my foot in the door to become a programmer? And I just want to take a moment to mention Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp is a 12-week intensive course that focuses on the technologies of the here and now for web development. Some of the things that they're actually teaching in this 12-week course, it's geared to get you into the industry by focusing on things like jQuery, Node.js, React, Angular, how to use GitHub. So a lot of the things that you're going to need to do as a developer, as soon as you start, they're going to be teaching you in this coding bootcamp, and the entire goal is to be able to get you into the industry within 12 weeks. So if you guys are interested in learning more information about Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp, just check out the link in the description tab of this video. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.